Well, thank you for this very kind introduction, and thank you so much for taking your time to listen to what I have to say in the next couple of minutes, which, well, at least I think is a kind of interesting development. Well, a nice meadow with juicy grass. One thing you may notice is there are no cows there, and this may indeed be the scenery 20, 30, 40, 50 years from today. Who knows? But we're going to talk about meat a little bit, a product we, well, most of us at least, love quite dearly. One could argue we're a little bit addicted to it, even, about 90–95% of us. But unfortunately, it's also a very inefficient source of food, as I'm sure many of you will know. And its consumption has gone up so much that it is now one of the largest contributors to arguably one of the bigger problems this planet is facing, which is climate change. And I don't want to depress you too much, but it's actually going to get worse. There's sort of a law in economics that if you make more money, you eat more meat. This is pretty much anywhere in the world you can clearly see this. People who are poor or used to be poor and are no longer poor, one of the first things they do is include meat in their diets. And we're going to get richer. That is at least the expectation. We're going to get richer. On average, we're going to get richer. And also there's going to be much, much more of us. In 2050, 9 billion, 10 billion, some even think 11 billion of us, a little bit depending on what's going to happen in sub-Saharan Africa. But much more of us. And this has direct consequences for the meat consumption that's already, well, quite extravagant, if you like. So this development brings me to the conclusion that what we're facing is not just an ethical or a moral problem, it's a practical problem. It's just not going to fit. All that meat, we will not be able to produce that on just the one planet. So, we need to do something. And, well, essentially we can do two things. Well, we can do three things. One of them being to stop eating meat, or cut down considerably on meat consumption. And although some of us, and actually quite a few in Germany, somehow found the strength to do that, I don't really see that happening in most parts of the world. It's probably going to be quite the opposite. It's going to grow meat consumption. Another option is to produce products from completely different sources of material, like plants or bacteria or fungi or yeast or algae or even insects that mimic meat, that give us the experience that meat gives us, whatever that is, but meat consumption is an experience. And these last years, especially these last years, a lot of money has gone towards companies, especially in the US, that are developing technologies to produce products that mimic this meat experience. And these products are getting better. Some of the products out there in the market, compared to 20, 30, 40 years ago when they were really awful. Some of those products today are actually pretty good. But their market share to date, when you compare the consumer value, as it's called, of those products combined on the planet in terms of consumption, with the consumer value of meat, it is still well below 1% of the value of meat, and below that. Meat substitutes, as these products are called, indeed they are getting better, but they have not yet been accepted as full-blown replacements of meat by meat lovers. This is a picture that sort of illustrates that. It's taken last year in Houston when Hurricane Harvey paid a visit to Texas. And people were asked to leave or to seek shelter, but in any case to stock food. And this is the vegetarian section of a supermarket in Houston just before Harvey came along. So I guess a picture says 1,000 words. Now, Texas is not your average meat place in the world, I grant you that, so it's a little bit biased, but that's the way it is today. So that's where cultured meat comes in. What is cultured meat? Cultured meat is meat produced from the same cells that make the muscles of the animals that we eat. It's just grown in a bioreactor with the use of tissue engineering. And it differs from all those products that try to mimic meat in that it is meat. At least biologically, it is meat. Legally, we'll have to see, but biologically, it's meat. And specifically for meat, that might very well be a decisive advantage, we think. This is a picture of a muscle fiber through a microscope. And that guy is our hero. It's the muscle stem cell. It's a tiny cell that sits there on muscle fibers here and there. You will find them if you take a really good look. And these cells are the repair kit of the muscle. So when you cut yourself, for instance, these cells, they sense it. They start to replicate, and they literally fill the gap. And then in some miracle process, they merge into functional muscle tissue. And as such, they repair the muscle. The muscle is a self-repairing organ. So this cell can turn into that. That's kind of weird, but really it can. It's a very complex and a very structured organ, a muscle, and this cell has the capability to do that. And that's what we do as well. So we don't use any trickery, we just use what's around in nature. We borrow from nature. We take a biopsy of, in our case, a cow. We work on beef. And from that biopsy, we isolate those so-called satellite cells, and then we go into stage 1 of the production process. It's a 2-stage process, essentially. Stage 1 is producing a hell of a lot of those cells, so letting those cells replicate in a bioreactor. And this is a stage that probably looks like you imagine it looks like brewing beer, a little bit like that, like large vessels, and in there, cells replicating. And when they're done replicating, we harvest them and we bring them into a system. This sounds a little bit cryptical, but we bring them into a system in which these cells merge into these functional muscle fibers. And when you have enough of those fibers, you can harvest them and make a hamburger from them, for instance, or a meatball or whatever product. And that's what we did in 2013 when we produced this well, quite famous hamburger that was cooked in London during a live, well, press conference / cooking show. So what's to be done after that? Because we're not there yet. What we showed in London was a proof of concept, and it was by no means a finished product. We still need to work in the cell proliferation bit, so this first stage. We still need to work on the growth media, which needs to be so-called serum-free. Traditionally, there is blood in the food that is given to cells in science, in research. When cells are grown, they are given blood, which, for obvious reasons in our case, is not an option. So it needs to be replaced. We need to work on so-called serum-free culturing. And we can already do that, by the way. Also, we need to work on the stemness, so the proliferative capacity, the capacity to duplicate, to keep on duplicating. Not endlessly, but as long as possible. We need to improve that as well, because it adds to the efficiency of the process. And recycling is very important. So using the media, the growth media, the food, again, that we give to these cells, reusing it after it's been used for a batch in a second batch, and taking out the valuable components after use. Recycling, very important. And on the process side, we need to work on scaling. These are typical flasks in which you grow cells in a lab, but we need to go to a larger scale and to ultimately an extremely large scale. Mammalian cells, our cell type, are grown today by stem cell producers in vessels up to 25,000 liters. So that already works. And then on the tissue formation side, so making actual meat, we need to work on the maturity of the tissue, which has to do with the naturalness of the muscle fiber, if you like. And part of that comes from exercise, funny enough, which, well, it sounds funny, but it's actually quite logical. If we exercise, our muscles grow as well. So our cells and our muscle fibers need to have some sort of stress when they grow. And we have a system in which that happens, but we are optimizing that system. And also we need a certain jelly environment in which the first stages of muscle formation take place. This gel, usually in science, is an animal-based gel, which in our case needs to be replaced by a plant-based gel. We're quite a long way there, but we still, again, need to optimize here. And then we need to be able to make fat. We've been talking about muscle so far, but we also must make fat, because meat is partially fat. It contributes to the taste, to the texture. And here too, we made good progress. We're already capable of growing fat tissue next to muscle tissue, and we're just about ready to start scaling that up. And then one final item, which is produced in the fiber tissue stage, is the stuff that makes meat red, myoglobin. A very important molecule. It's just a molecule, but it contributes to the taste, it contributes to the nutritional value through the iron that's attached to it, and obviously it contributes to the color of meat. We need to be able to make those cells produce myoglobin, which they do in nature as well, but we need to do it in our system too. And again, we've made good progress here. We're actually already capable of doing this. Scaling of the fiber production process, that's something of a black box. Nobody's really, it's a medical technology, what we're doing, and nobody's ever given really much thought on growing, like, I don't know, 100,000 kilos of heart muscle tissue or liver cell tissue. Nobody's done that so far. So this is an interesting area where probably a lot of companies will start to file for IP. We're filing for a patent here as well. So we're developing a system in which we can automatically make muscle fibers without any manual intervention. And then finally, the growth medium, the food that we give to these cells. This is today a pharmaceutical product, and it needs to be turned into a bulk product, a food product, which means cheap, low margins, and that's not something that the pharmaceutical industry finds very interesting. So this might very well be the feed industry who are going to do this. But and in any case, anywhere between the feed industry today and the pharmaceutical industry, in between those two, where there is nothing today, we need to start growing a supply chain that produces this food. And there are some initiatives, not just by us, but by a lot of the companies active in this field, to actually start doing this. And you need to then start bulk sourcing all those materials that are in the food that we give to these cells, like the sugars, the amino acids, the vitamins, etc. And we need to scale the growth factor production. The growth factors are the replacement of this blood I just mentioned that is commonly added to food, to cell culture systems. This needs to be scaled. 80% of the price of the meat ultimately produced through this technology is a reflection of the price of the growth medium. So it's critical that we make this cheap. Regulatory. We're in the EU. We need to go through the so-called novel food procedure, which has been revised as in 2018, which is partially a scientific procedure. So it's been the process and the product will be assessed by a group of scientists, but it's also slightly political. You see PUF there. Let me just click through. You see the decision, ultimately, if this product is approved, is a decision made by a committee called PUF, and this is just a bunch of the member states voting. And they vote not based on the outcomes of the scientific assessment, they vote based on if they like to have this product in the markets or not. So if anyone from France or Hungary or whatever says, meh, it's a nice process, but I don't like it, he can say no. So this is something we need to take care of. We'll see that when we get there. I'll come to timing in a little bit. Consumer acceptance. We're quite happy to see that 50%, average 50% of people, when surveyed in the Western world at least, which is where the surveys have been done, say, yeah, I would try this when it's on the shelves. So consistently we see that there is a willingness among consumers to try this product, but 50% is not enough. We need to convince her as well. And that brings you to the question why she feels this way. Well, it may have to do with trust. And when trust comes along, I tend to show a very Dutch product. Our moderator recognizes it right away. This is a frikandel, not to be mixed up with the frikadel that you know here in Germany. It's a different product. Frikandel was introduced about 50 years ago in the Netherlands. It's well, they eat it in Belgium a little bit, but it's the single most eaten meat snack in the Netherlands. Nobody knows what's in it. Nobody knows how they're made, or they just yeah, they're just there. They exist. There's 17 million of us in the Netherlands. We eat 634 million of those guys every year. So on average, 34 per person. We trust this product, and we don't know it. So it takes time. That's the message behind it. But there's also an emotional, cultural thingy associated with meat, dating back probably from the time that we were hunters and gatherers. Imagine yourself with your horse on the prairie, the sun's going down, you're roasting a nice ribeye, it tastes good. How are you going to replace that emotion with something that comes from a technology like this? I don't know. I don't know. I think for a while, if this technology succeeds, there will be anyway people who eat meat for this very reason. Very quickly, how long is it going to take before you guys can see anything going on in the market? Well, we still need about 2 years for product improvements and process design, and regulatory approval will also absorb in parallel a lot of that time. But we foresee the first small-scale introductions in 2021, really small scale. And 2 years after, we plan to have a larger production setup operational in the Netherlands. There's a lot of us around. We've been doing this, we humans have been doing this, and by this I mean using animals for food for 10,000 years. We've gotten better and better at it. It's at least more and more efficient at it. We're now starting to understand how those production systems work on the level of the cell, and we're more and more capable of isolating those systems from the animal and running them outside of the animal. And milk, eggs, meat, leather, all these products will become available from a technology platform that's emerging, and I would argue to Google it, a platform that's called cellular agriculture. 10, 15 years from today, milk will no longer have to come from a cow, and I mean real milk, not the soy stuff, real milk. Or most of the eggs will no longer have to come from chickens, and we will have started to produce meat without killing animals. And that's a future I very much look forward to. Thank you.